Hi, welcome to the channel. Of course, if you're new here, I am delighted to meet you. I'm Jen, I'm a doctor of physical therapy, and I've experienced radical healing on a carnivore diet, and there's nothing that I want more than to help you do the same. Today, we're going to do something a little different. I'm going to answer some questions that people have submitted to me about the carnivore diet, and I answered those people individually, but I thought it might be helpful to go over some of this together because you may have some of the same questions. I've got the questions right here on my computer, so we're going to go through them one by one. And if you have any additional questions, leave them in the comments, and I'd be so happy to answer those as well. And maybe they'll be featured on an upcoming Q&A video. The first question is very basic, but that's important. It's, what is the carnivore diet? Unfortunately, that's not as clear as it should be because there are different people with different definitions. And I think a lot of the gray area is because many very influential people started out promoting a carnivore diet and then kind of pivoted. And so now there's just a lot of mixed opinions on what is a carnivore diet. In my opinion, and what seems to be the opinion of the doctors that I follow and respect, the carnivore diet is any animal food. So that can be meat, eggs, dairy, any derivative of those things, any product that comes from an animal. So it could be the organs, the skin, the bones, anything at all. If it comes from an animal, with the exception of honey, that's a little bit of a different thing, then it fits on a carnivore diet. So the carnivore diet is naturally very high in fat, pretty high in protein, and very low to no carb. Lucy's deciding if she wants to make an appearance or not. Come on out, babe. Come on, go get in your bed. Okay, she's not interested. Here's the next question. Is the carnivore diet healthy? I will admit it completely goes against sort of the mainstream narrative that we've all been hearing for decades about how we should eat lots of fiber and low fat. And now there's even this big push toward going plant-based. So it's very, very deviant from that. But yes, the carnivore diet is extremely healthy for many reasons. One of those reasons is that it cuts out all processed foods, all sugar. If you're a strict carnivore, you're cutting out any artificial sweeteners. It cuts out industrial seed oils, which are incredibly inflammatory. And it prioritizes whole foods with healthy saturated fats. It's a very complete diet. In fact, ruminant meats are the only thing that if that's all you ate for the rest of your life, you could live a full and healthy life. That cannot be said of any other food group without supplementation. It's extremely nutritious. I previously made a video about the nutrient density in animal products. I'll link that below so you can check it out for yourself. But basically, animal products are the most nutrient-dense foods on the planet, even when compared to the superfoods like kale and broccoli and that kind of thing. The foods on the carnivore diet are full of all the good stuff, but the other really awesome thing is that it cuts out all the bad stuff. I mentioned the seed oils and the sugar and the processed food and all that, but there are other things that are cut out as well, such as anti-nutrients that are found in plants and often cause allergic type reactions or interfere with absorption of vitamins and minerals that we need. Very low carb diets that are full of whole foods like the carnivore diet promote high HDL, low triglycerides, decreased inflammation, weight loss, lower blood pressure, better insulin sensitivity, lower fasting glucose levels. For all these reasons, the carnivore diet is very, very healthy. Here's an interesting question. Can you do the carnivore diet if you don't have a gallbladder? That's a great question, and I can totally understand how someone who's had a cholecystectomy would be curious about that because the bile does help you break down fats. And so if you don't have a gallbladder, technically you don't have the same amount of storage for bile. Let's first have a little bit of an anatomy lesson. So bile is produced by the liver. The liver secretes the bile and stores the excess in the gallbladder. So then when the body needs to break down fats, it can take some stored bile from the gallbladder to help with that fat digestion. If you don't have a gallbladder, again, you don't have that surplus of excess stored bile, but the liver continues to make bile. So what happens is that the bile will go directly from the liver to the small intestine where it can be used to help break down the fat. The gallbladder is bypassed completely. The beauty is that your body can sense when you need more bile. So when you are eating more animal foods that are high in fat, your body recognizes, I need more bile to break this down. So the liver will upregulate, which means that it produces more bile. If you don't have a gallbladder, the main thing you need to do is start a little bit slow and easy. If you're going from a standard American diet or a low-fat diet, You just want to gradually increase your fat intake per meal so that your liver can recognize the need for increased bile and upregulate slowly as needed. When you first start out on a carnivore diet, you might need to eat 4 or 5 times a day, keeping the fat fairly low in each meal. But then as you get used to it and your liver becomes very efficient at producing bile, you can probably go to 2 or 3 meals a day without feeling overloaded with fat. Some people without a gallbladder might need a little digestive help at first as well, in the form of ox bile or digestive enzymes or something like that, just to kind of help them get over the hump. Our next question is a very popular one. How can you do a carnivore diet on a budget? Let's first of all reframe this question, because many people, I think, they're looking at one meal to the next from a regular diet to a carnivore diet. And so let's say you used to eat macaroni and cheese and hot dogs, and now you're thinking about a ribeye. Of course, there's going to be a cost difference there. But the thing is, a ribeye that might cost you $10, that's going to keep you full for hours and hours. It's also extremely full of nutrients, so you're actually getting what you need from the food. Whereas a box of macaroni, sure, maybe you'll feel good for 30 minutes, but you're going to be starving as soon as that digests. The glucose and insulin spike is going to cause a crash, and then you're going to be craving more carbs, of course. You're going to be seeking out further snacks. So you frequently end up buying extra food to serve as sides or snacks throughout the day to kind of keep yourself feeling as full as you need to. So that's one thing to keep in mind. Also, carnivores aren't typically frequenting the Starbucks drive-thru and getting a $7 latte with a muffin and, all of those kinds of things that really add up. Not to mention alcohol, which can be very expensive, eating out a lot. I mean, these things all add up. The alcohol, the eating out, the extra treats and sweets, and then all the extra sides. Not to mention all the food that goes to waste, the fruits and vegetables that you just don't eat fast enough. So I want you to keep that in mind. But here are some practical tips for buying carnivore foods on a budget. My first tip is to be very aware of the sales. So you can look at your weekly grocery store ad, or you can actually peruse the meat department of the grocery store, which is my favorite activity, and find the things that are on sale that week. If you go into the grocery store thinking, these are the things I want to buy this week, you might end up paying regular price. But if you go in with an open mind and you find that chuck roast is on sale, eggs are on sale, ribeyes are on sale this week, then you can sort of plan your week around those things that are on sale. That's a very helpful technique. There's always something on sale. You can definitely prioritize those foods. And there are often foods that are just about to expire that are drastically marked down just so they can sell them before they expire. So I think those are great to buy too. And if you're not going to eat them immediately, you just throw them in the freezer. Another thing you can do is prioritize the foods that are naturally a little bit cheaper. Examples would be eggs, pork, chicken, fattier ground beef, and leaner steaks. So a sirloin, for example, is going to be cheaper than a ribeye, and 73.27 ground beef is going to be cheaper than 93.7. It's all supply and demand. So the meats that people don't want as much, you're going to be able to find for cheaper. And there are some good techniques for making those foods that are less desirable just as desirable as the good stuff. For example, if you get sirloins instead of ribeyes, I personally would much prefer a ribeye, but a sirloin can be great if you just get some free fat trimmings from the butcher and serve that along with your sirloin. Then it's nice and fatty and delicious and just as satisfying as a ribeye. When you get fattier ground beef, if you don't like it that fatty, which first of all, it's pretty delicious anyway, you might like it. But if you don't like that, just drain off some of the fat. A lot of it drains off anyway during cooking. You don't have to add that back, and you can end up with leaner meat than you think. Now, I'm not saying not to center your carnivore diet around red meat. I certainly do. But even if you just replace a few meals a week with these cheaper cuts like pork or chicken or eggs, then that can add up and save you quite a bit of money in the long run. Buying in bulk can also be very helpful if you can afford it. You've got the storage space. I think it's probably worth $100 or so to have an extra freezer. And then when meat is on sale at the grocery store, but you're not going to eat it for a while, you can buy a bunch and then store it. Or often you can do the same thing from a local farmer. When you're buying in bulk, it's often cheaper anyway, but sometimes even the farmers will have really great deals because they're trying to turn over some products. And the last thing I'll ask you to keep in mind is, how much money are you saving on your health? I know for me personally, I was taking very expensive prescriptions and going to the doctor a lot for all of the health problems I was having. And so that's another place that I'm saving money by being on the carnivore diet. Our next question is, can you do a carnivore diet without red meat? It seems like a travesty to me to not eat red meat because it's so delicious and so nutrient dense. But I understand there are some circumstances where, for religious purposes or maybe allergy purposes, that someone may not want to eat red meat. You absolutely can still do a carnivore diet with no red meat at all. You can, like I said, prioritizing those cheaper cuts of meat. They're often not red meat. So you can do dairy, chicken, pork, I think is technically not considered red meat. I guess whatever you'd consider that. Any kind of seafood. The opportunities are really endless here. There are dozens, if not hundreds of things that you can eat that don't include beef or lamb or any of those kind of ruminant animals. The only thing is you might have to be a little bit more careful about really broadening the amount of foods you eat so that you're hitting all the nutrients that you need. And you might also have to consider supplementing extra fat, whether that be from butter or tallow, I guess, if you are willing to eat tallow, or egg yolks or something along those lines, because a lot of those non-red meat options are lower in fat. And so you've got to really pay attention to how you're feeling. And if you're low energy or you're getting constipated or something like that, then certainly consider adding some fat. A recent question I got from a very concerned woman was, can you do a carnivore diet if you already have high cholesterol and high triglycerides? I've created a lot of videos about cholesterol on a carnivore diet, but this was a little bit of a different question in that she already was worried about her lipids and her doctor was as well. The doctor's recommending a statin. And so it's fairly typical that a doctor would be like, no, you should not go on a carnivore diet with those lipids. And so when she asked me that question, I really wanted to provide her a good answer. Here's the thing. When you start any kind of very low carb diet, but especially a carnivore diet that's full of healthy whole foods, you are almost guaranteed for those triglycerides to come way down. So the triglyceride part of the question is very easy. Yes, absolutely, a carnivore diet is great if you have high triglycerides. The total cholesterol, however, is a little bit of a different story. Some people that have high LDL and high total cholesterol will find that their cholesterol comes down when they go on a low carb or carnivore diet. That's not the case for everyone though. Some people it may stay the same, some people it may even go up a little bit. But I've told you guys many times, and you can search through my videos if you want to learn more, that what really matters here is that HDL is high and triglycerides are low, because that indicates that the LDL you do have is large, buoyant, safe, and healthy LDL, not the small, dense particles that become that way because they're exposed to glucose, and they can build up in the blood vessels and lead to an increased risk of cardiovascular disease. So yes, ultimately, I think the carnivore diet is a very good choice for someone even if they already have high cholesterol and high triglycerides, though I do think there's good value in continuing to monitor your labs and any other objective data you can get so you can really pay attention to how you, bio-individually, are responding to the diet. Can you include seasonings on a carnivore diet? If you're being a carnivore purist, complete stickler, no cheats at all, then technically I would say the answer is no, with the exception of salt. But there are many well-known carnivores out there that do include seasonings and even some condiments like mustard and sugar-free barbecue sauce and those kinds of things. But people that are really touchy, like autoimmune type conditions and stuff, they often need a very strict carnivore diet with no plants. And so for me personally, I do try to avoid seasonings. And when I have a lot of them, I can definitely tell a difference in how I'm feeling. But this is just sort of a trial and error. You can try different things that you like let's say garlic powder or some kind of seasoning salt. And if you're doing fine with it and you're achieving your goals, go for it. But if you're still struggling and you're not sure what to do differently and you're including seasonings, then I would suggest cutting those out and then adding things back one by one to make sure that what you're eating truly is the best for you. Here's a very specific question, but I think it's a good one to touch on. Does sous vide cooking increase histamines? Many people have a histamine intolerance. And so when they eat foods that are aged or slow cooked, like 24-hour process in a slow cooker or something like that, the amount of histamines in food can build up. And then when you ingest those, you can end up with a histamine reaction. So for many people, that's like stuffy nose, sniffles, hives, watery eyes, that kind of thing. But there are actually a lot of other symptoms related to histamine intolerance. I have a video on that too, so you're welcome to check that out. The reason that this person was curious about the sous vide method is because boiling food technically doesn't usually increase histamine significantly, but cooking it slowly over time does. And so sous vide is a little bit of a mixture of those two. You cook the food in water, although it's in a plastic bag that's vacuum sealed. And then the food cooks from somewhere between about an hour and like 24 hours. So in my opinion, cooking something like a ribeye using the sous vide method can increase histamines more than like a flash cooking in an air fryer on a grill or something like that. However, an hour or two is probably not a huge amount of time that's going to really build up those histamines. Whereas some things, when you sous vide them, like a roast, for example, you may be sous videing that for 24 hours. So I would say the longer you're cooking something, the more you should be concerned about the histamine response. So just something to, again, kind of try out for yourself and see how you're doing. But it's just going to be a little bit different for everyone. And sous vide is a little bit in the middle as far as the potential for increasing histamines. Our next question is, what labs do you recommend? This is something I feel very strongly about myself, just because I think it's great to have as much objective testing as possible for yourself, for peace of mind, to monitor how you're doing, and also to present that to your doctor or anyone else in your life who's questioning what you're doing. So I made a list here of some things that I think are very helpful. I'm going to read them for you so I don't forget anything. As far as the lipid testing, I mean, at least a basic cholesterol panel. So HDL, LDL, triglycerides, and total cholesterol. Most insurance companies will do that every year for free anyway. But if you can get your hands on an NMR lipo profile plus lipids plus IR, that's even better. It's going to address insulin resistance, and it's going to actually break down the particle size and the type of particles that make up your LDL. Knowing LDL by itself is honestly not all that helpful. So that test is very useful if you can get it. Some other really useful markers are hemoglobin A1C, CRP, which is C-reactive protein, and fasting insulin. Those are all going to help you understand your metabolic health and what your blood sugar levels are and what kind of insulin load you have going through your body most of the time. A complete metabolic panel is usually included, and that will address liver and kidney function. And then a thyroid panel can be really helpful as well. I actually had my labs most recently tested by Coach Jen Winkler on Instagram, and she's really useful at helping you figure out exactly what labs to have done besides the one I mentioned based on your particular lifestyle, your particular goals, and then she can actually order them for you and read and assess them for you. If that interests you, check her out. Here's a very practical question. When tracking, do you record the weight of your meat before or after cooking? My short answer is record the weight before cooking. In most tracking apps like MyFitnessPal or Chronometer or Carb Manager or any of those, the foods that are preloaded in there typically include data for pre-cooked food. For example, if you're cooking burger patties and you make 4-ounce burger patties out of your pound of meat, your resulting burger patties are probably going to be more like 3 to 3.5 ounces each. Instead of recording it in your app as 3.5 ounces, I would record it as 4. That's going to be a little more accurate, but keep in mind that some of the fat is going to render off during cooking. And so whatever fat content your app tells you that that food has, unless you're adding back the rendered fat, you may not be getting all that fat. Now, sometimes I'll cook, let's say, a whole 16-ounce steak, and I won't eat it all. And so then the next day when I'm eating the leftovers, maybe there's like 7 ounces left. And technically that's the post-cooked weight. The 7 ounces is after it's been cooked. So I just do my best and kind of round up a little bit. Maybe if I eat a 7-ounce steak that was cooked yesterday, I'll say it's 8 ounces. It doesn't have to be perfect, right? It just has to be kind of in the ballpark if you've got some goals that involve tracking. So don't sweat it. Just try to stay consistent as much as possible with whatever you do, and you'll be fine. When it comes to the fat, however, I use a different technique. Like I said, when cooking meat, a lot of the fat renders off. So when you're truly just cooking fat, let's say fat trimmings in the air fryer, a lot of that tallow is going to render off. And so if you don't add that back, you're just not getting that fat. So when I record pure fat content, I record the weight after cooking. Actually, speaking of, the next question is, should I add the fat back after cooking? Now, this is a personal preference. If you cook burger patties, let's say, and the thought of adding the fat back just disgusts you, or when you do add the fat back, you get some nausea, some abdominal discomfort, or you're having diarrhea or anything like that, then I would say all of those reasons are valid for why you should not add the fat back. However, if you think of that fat and you think, oh, if I add this back, it sounds so delicious, and you feel good and you're not having diarrhea, or let's say you're actually a little on the constipated side, all of those reasons would make it make sense to add the fat back. So depending on your specific situation, how you're feeling, how that sounds to you, all of that, that's how you should know whether or not to add the fat back. Ooh, here's a big one. How much fat and protein should I be eating? This is a little bit of a nuanced question, but if you just need a place to start, I think for most people, 1 gram of fat and 1 gram of protein per pound of body weight is a good place to start. Now, if your goal is to lose 100 pounds, let's say, and you're currently very overweight, then setting up that 1-to-1 ratio at your current weight, let's say your current weight is 250 pounds. If you do 250 grams of protein and 250 grams of fat, that may end up being a whole lot of food. So I would say you can come down about 50 grams of both if your goal is weight loss. So again, if you weigh 250 pounds, and let's say your goal is to weigh 150, I would not go all the way down to this goal weight of 150 and do 150 grams of protein and 150 grams of fat. But if you wanted to do somewhere between 200 grams of each and 250, then that would be fine. And that's going to put you at about a 70% ratio of calories from fat, which is pretty good for most people. So do that for a while, see how you feel, and then make adjustments as appropriate. Next question, is lunch meat okay on a carnivore diet? So if you don't know the word lunch meat, I guess processed meats like bologna, hot dogs, anything like that that you buy in a package that's typically just meat, maybe with some salt, some nitrates, I guess, that kind of thing. I think those kinds of meats are fine, especially in moderation and especially at the beginning of a carnivore diet. Because sometimes at the beginning, and here's another especially if you're adding kids, it's a little bit hard sometimes to go from standard American to pure, healthy meat and salt only. But if you can include some things like pepperonis and hot dogs and stuff like that, sometimes that will help to bridge that transition. So in the beginning, I think it's a decent choice. But here's the thing that happens when you've been carnivore for a few months, your body really starts to recognize, I feel really good when I have this, and when I have this, not so much. And I think that many people, when they eat a lot of the kind of processed meats, they find, I don't feel as good when I eat this. And so you're naturally not going to want that as much after you've been carnivore for a while. And so at that point, you can start cutting it out a little bit. Again, I think it's okay to include. I think it's within a carnivore diet, it's a reasonable option as long as it doesn't have maple syrup or sugar or something like that in it. And in a pinch, I'll eat it too, especially when I'm traveling, because sometimes that's the easiest thing to get at a gas station or something like that. But again, keeping it in moderation and not making it the staple of your diet is my recommendation. Ooh, my last question. We're going to stir up some stuff. How do you morally justify funding animal abuse, torture, and exploitation? I included this question just to kind of give you an idea of the questions that I get sometimes. Obviously, this person feels very strongly that what I'm doing is unethical. I'm assuming that they're vegan or vegetarian based on the tone of the question. That's fine. But here's the thing. I don't feel that I have to morally justify it because I don't think I'm doing anything wrong. I honestly believe, I'm going to go a little deep here. I believe that God created us and created these animals and created this world in a way for us to have what we need to nourish our bodies. And maybe that sounds like egocentric or speciesist or something. I don't know. But that's what I believe. So I don't have to counter this argument in my head to make myself feel better about it. Of course, I don't want animals to be tortured or mistreated. And so I try to go out of my way to purchase food from local farmers or people that I know and trust that treat their animals well. But that's not always an option. If you truly in your heart believe that that's what's happening when you eat animals, I don't blame you. I guess I wouldn't either. But that's not at all how I feel. I don't believe any of that to be true. And so I sleep easy every night, even though I eat tons of meat every day. That's all of our questions for this time. I hope you enjoyed that. It was really fun for me to kind of get to go back and forth and get to talk to you in a way that feels a little bit one-on-one. So thank you so much for joining me. If you enjoyed this, please like and subscribe. And like I said earlier, if you have any questions, leave them in the comments. I'd love to either address them there and or in an upcoming video. If you'd like, check me out on Instagram where we can connect even more pretty much every day.